February 1st, 1979. Our tale begins inside the Beverage Center. It was a beer and alcohol store in Chattanooga, a large city in the southern end of East Tennessee. The business was owned and operated by Samuel Pettyjohn. Samuel was a wealthy entrepreneur and owned numerous businesses in the area. However, this would be no regular day at the Beverage Center. At that moment, business would be slow and few customers were around save for a few in the parking lots. Two witnesses outside the store heard a number of gunshots from inside the building. A large man wearing a heavy trench coat and glasses stepped outside and fired a few pistol shots into the air to either make passerby flee or not pursue him. Though the man was described as African American, the man was actually white. He had dark makeup coating his skin and wore a fake beard, and a dark wig to obscure his features. Once the mysterious figure fled, those who went inside the beverage center found Samuel Pettyjohn dead within the store. He had been shot 4 times. The register was untouched and filled with money. Samuel's cash and jewelry, totaling thousands of dollars, were still on his person. It soon became apparent to investigators that this was no robbery gone wrong. More bizarrely, a case with a listening device and numerous cassette tapes were found. The items were most likely Pettyjohn's, but the contents of said tapes would never be known as they somehow went missing soon after being removed from the crime scene. However, the reason for Samuel Pettyjohn's death would emerge fully decades later. Pettyjohn had entangled himself in a conspiracy of political corruption and bribery at the core of the Tennessee state government. While numerous figures would be implicated in this scandal, the chief ringleader of this twisted cabal was Ray Blanton, the former one-term governor of the volunteer state. Welcome to Historical Detour. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Consider pledging to my Patreon. Ray Blanton had a storied and controversial life well before his ascent to the governorship. He was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Raised in McNear County to Great Depression-era sharecroppers in West Tennessee, Ray would aid in his family's ambitions in maintaining a road paving business. After graduating college, Ray would briefly teach in Indiana from 1951 to 1953, before working for the family business full-time. By the mid-1960s, Ray decided to run for his first political office. Ray was considered a political outsider to the Republican and Democratic Party machines which had dominated state politics throughout much of the 20th century. His primary base were poor whites and farmers discontent with perceived poor representation in state affairs in comparison to larger cities such as Nashville and Memphis. For a single term of 1965 to 1967, he served in the Tennessee State House of Representatives. Ray, during this time, would run and beat the incumbent Congressman Thomas Murray in the Democratic primary by a mere 384 votes, and Ray would handily win the following election and assumed office in the U.S. House of Representatives. Ray had a mixed record during his time in Washington. While he advocated for projects for his home district in Tennessee as a whole, he proved adamantly against protesters of American involvement in the Vietnam War. He was also opposed to extending black civil rights legislation. Blanton was even opposed to the popular 26th Amendment that lowered the voting age from 21 to 18 in 1971. After 3 ineffectual terms in Congress and facing a losing redistricting battle, Ray attempted to run as the Democratic nominee for Senate. While gaining the nomination, he was trounced by the incumbent Republican Howard Baker. Ray Blanton was down but not out. The election for Tennessee's governorship was fast approaching. In a crowded Democratic primary of 1974, Blanton eked out a winning 23% of primary voters. There were 12 candidates on the ballot. Blanton narrowly defeated the Republican candidate Lamar Alexander to assume the governorship in 1975. Whatever positive legacy Blanton hoped to leave, however, was marred by a series of scandals. The early scandals and controversies of Blanton's governorship were fairly typical of American politics. He provided lucrative state contracts for his family's construction business. Many also complained of Blanton and his staff's excessive spending, all at taxpayer expense. Additionally, his administration sold surplus government cars to political allies as gifts. However, it would be the pay-for-pardons scandal that would earn Blanton's administration the most infamy. The scandal had started around the year of 1977. Various officials, allegedly including Blanton, accepted bribes from inmates to be granted speedy pardons or clemency. In Tennessee and many other states, governors are vested with the executive authority to authorize early release and pardons for any state crimes. Through a number of middlemen, inmates, some of whom were serving for life, would procure thousands of dollars worth of bribes. These bribes would be given to state officials who would seek to either grant early parole or even pardons from the governor, irregardless of the inmate's suitability to be released. Blanton, it is claimed, would have gone so far as to pardon James Earl Ray, the man convicted of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. That is, if Ray had provided a suitably hefty bribe. Mary Raggiani, the chairwoman of the Tennessee Board of Pardons and Paroles, refused to expedite the process for these inmates. She voiced her concerns to law enforcement, and the FBI began an extensive investigation. Blanton, meanwhile, continued to pardon dozens of inmates, several of whom were serving sentences of murder or other violent crimes. Public outrage and legal scrutiny was mounting by late 1978. The FBI had a new potential source of information as the previously mentioned Samuel Pettyjohn became an informant. Pettyjohn allegedly had acted as a middleman communicator between inmates and state officials. If he flipped, his testimony could be devastating. The FBI would raid the offices of various state officials in late 1978. 3 officials were arrested and would be convicted of the pardon scandal. Blanton himself remained free and insisted on no wrongdoing. On one of his last days in office, Blanton pardoned 52 prisoners. Other senior state lawmakers convened and decided to inaugurate the recent governor-elect Lamar Alexander 3 days early in January 1979 to prevent further tainted pardons from Blanton. Pettyjohn would be assassinated soon after in February of that year. In 2021, decades later, it was discovered that his killer had been William Alley, a previously convicted bank robber. Evidently, Alley had been paid to eliminate Pettyjohn to silence him from turning more evidence over to the FBI. Who paid for it is unclear, but evidently all parties involved has since passed away. It is also claimed that there were 4 other deaths involved in the investigation, but no details have been given, either of their circumstances or identities. After this informal impeachment, Blanton would face legal trouble in the 1980s and was convicted of accepting bribes to give liquor licenses during his time in office. He would serve close to 2 years in prison. He would die in 1996 of liver failure. His last days were spent as a political pariah reduced to working at a Ford dealership. One of the few pop culture legacies of the scandal is the 1980 film Mary, which dramatizes the pardon scandal. Quick shout out and credit to Walter Brisby, my first ever paid patron on Patreon.